This video, we will be talking about the Chicago mayoral elections, which happened just yesterday, last night. So, as you can see, Paul Vallis and Brandon Johnson have advanced to a runoff election, and Lori Lightfoot, the incumbent, actually will not make it to the second round, which is quite different from the results back in 2019. So let's look at the results first of all. You can see there's a lot of purple. The purple seems to be the majority of the ground, and that is actually the incumbent's color. However, she actually didn't make it out because many of these areas are less populated than some of the other wards in Chicago, which are more populated, that voted for the other two candidates. Now, first, let's introduce the candidates in this race because there is a lot of them. If you look at the total amount of candidates, there's a lot of them. But really, there were four that stood out. Paul Vallis, a relatively more conservative Democrat with more conservative values on things like policing. Brandon Johnson, a progressive candidate. Lori Lightfoot, the incumbent. And Jesus Garcia, who is a progressive congressman. Now, in 2019, as you can see right here, Lori Lightfoot in the first round only received 17% of vote against the second place at 16%. However, in the runoff, Lori Lightfoot beat her other contender by more than 45 points. This was an astonishing win for the then incumbent. And if you look at the results here, every ward, which is what they basically call Chicago, in basically the towns in Chicago, went to Lori Lightfoot. However, this time it was very, very different. If you look at the results here, this was a very diverse map, and in fact, not only did Lori Lightfoot not win, she actually finished third behind both Paul Vallis and Brandon Johnson. And if we look at the like map changes, this is also really significant. Here you can see Lori Lightfoot, one of her strongest areas was this ward right here, a pretty large population center. Which went for her with more than 85% of the vote. This time, she does not even have 7% of the vote here. Paul Vallis actually has 72% of the vote here. Here, the first place contender and a more conservative candidate. Now, if we look at last time, Paul Vallis, not Paul Vallis, Lori Lightfoot, the incumbent, got 85% of the vote in this ward. And in this ward, she also got around 85% of the vote, which was two of her strongest wards. However, both of those areas went to Paul Vallis by significant amounts. Both of them went for him by 50 points. And in fact, some of the Lori Lightfoot's weakest areas were in 2019 were actually some of her strongest areas this election cycle. Now, why is that the case? First up, Paul Vallis is a relatively conservative Democrat. All four of these top contenders are considered Democrats, but Paul Vallis is definitely the most conservative out of the pack. But in 2019, Lori Lightfoot was actually the more conservative over Tony Preckwinkle, who was a very much more progressive Democrat, and that is why this result is so different. Now, why did Lori Lightfoot get primaried out in the first place? Well, you have to look at the crime rates in the city. The crime rates have skyrocketed. Suicide rates have skyrocketed. Many people are not happy with the incumbent, who, although won an impressive 73% of the vote last time, is not really well liked. And if you look at this map here, it's very similar of a situation. Many people voted against Lori Lightfoot. And they were actually pretty split. No candidate reached over 35% of the vote. Only two candidates got even more than 20% of the vote. And if we look at the map over here, if you look at some of these areas here, the top part of Chicago here, many of these areas voted for Paul Vallis. These are the more conservative parts of the region, indeed. Brandon Johnson, this part over here, voted for Brandon Johnson, as well as Central Chicago. These are more progressive areas. Now, Lori Lightfoot was the incumbent, and incumbents get a lot of the advantage. So she got a lot of her name recognition, but the problem is her name recognition was not positive. She is generally disapproved of in the city of Chicago because what she did after she went into office, the extremely high crime rates and the struggling over the pandemic really hurt her in winning this election. And as you can see here, in 2019, Miss Lori Lightfoot was seen as an outsider, but now she can't be seen as an outsider as she is the incumbent. And many candidates actually challenge her, which is also another reason to suggest that why she lost, because there were many people that were dissatisfied with her. That's why there were this many challengers. And ultimately, it looks like Paul Vallas, the more conservative Democrat, the most conservative Democrat in the top four candidates, will end up being the mayor of Chicago. But we'll have to see because, again, the combined progressive vote is around 34%, while Paul Vallas also got around that much of the vote. So it really depends on what happens next. Regardless, that is my coverage of the Chicago mayoral elections. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day. Goodbye.